Welcome to Computer Vision Decoded, where we help you make sense of the quickly evolving world of computer vision. And in this episode, we're going to talk about the iPhone 15, and specifically the reaction from our chief scientist, Jared Heinle. If you don't know Jared is an expert in 3D reconstruction from imagery, and I love getting his take on the iPhone 15 because he'll go deep into the sensors and all the different parts that we can tell from watching the iPhone 15 announcement and see what they mean for the world of 3D reconstruction from imagery. So let's get into the iPhone 15 with Jared Heinle. Welcome, Jared, to another episode of Computer Vision Decoded. I'm really excited to talk about the iPhone 15 announcement with you. If you have listened to our past catalog of episodes, we did this with the iPhone 14 and 14 Pro, and I wouldn't think that we have much to talk about this time because not as much has changed, but I'm really excited. So, Jared, welcome to this episode. I'm assuming you tuned in. Is there anything that you were really excited, your key takeaways from that you were excited that you saw there?
Yeah, I mean, to me, well, I was, when I was watching it, I was really interested in seeing what the camera was going to look like, because me being a computer vision scientist, the camera is really important. But also just more broadly thinking about, the phone in general, I like seeing advances across the board, to make this mobile, to make this phone a better mobile capture device. So looking for, battery life and screen brightness and processor quality and processing speed, all sorts of things that go into creating that photo or the video at the end that we can use for computer vision. So I was trying just to hear what Apple was saying and interpret it in different ways to see how that might benefit 3D reconstruction.
Yeah, it reminds me of the question where people always say, like, what's a good camera for 3D reconstruction or for all kinds of things? And I said, it's always the camera you have with you. And more likely than not, you'll have an iPhone or a smartphone in general on you than anything else, because everything else is extra to carry, but this is in your pocket. So that is exciting. And then also it's the merging of why we do like that platform so much is that you have a camera, you have an internet communication device, you have all these things packed into one. So it's not just a camera, it's a computer with a nice camera with all this other, parts on it. So, all right. So if you're tuning into the audio version of this podcast, I will be putting visuals up, and I'll do my best to kind of explain what we have up. But we're just going to run through the iPhone 15 first, and then the iPhone 15 Pro. So just throwing up on my screen, just showing that they always show kind of, here's the iPhone 15 or whatever model and all the big highlights. So showing the 48 megapixel camera, the finish, 5G, all that things. Jared, was there anything about the 15 in specific that you were excited that they did to a non-Pro phone?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'll start with the camera. I was excited that they brought that sort of 48 megapixel sensor to the base model, so to that normal iPhone 15. I liked seeing that. I liked seeing that brighter screen brightness, a higher screen brightness in outdoor settings. That's great for when you're capturing images outdoors and need to see, hey, did I capture what I needed to? I liked that. Better battery life always helps. USB-C, I can reduce the number of cables that I have to manage. So a lot of these different things had some benefits there. But yeah, again, that camera and screen brightness were ones that I knew I would appreciate.
Yeah. I must point out a fact about Jared is he's actually not, an iPhone is not his everyday carry for a smartphone. So he does use them for work. Yeah. So having USB-C across all his phones probably is an exciting upgrade, because
it is because now I've had in my bag, I've had to carry lightning cables and USB-C cables, and I'm just like, why so many cables? So now it's USB-C all the way.
I'm happy too, because the iPad Pro that I have is USB-C. A bunch of all my DJI camera gear, all that stuff, it's all USB-C nowadays. So I was also excited about USB-C, but what I don't think they talked about, and I don't actually think it's part of the non-Pro phone, was the throughput, because on the Pro they have I think it's 10 gigabit per second USB-C. They're not all the same. So transferring files to a PC and without AirDrop is much faster on the iPhone 15 Pro. All right. Well, let's just dive into the camera because that is really what we care about for computer vision. Primarily, obviously, the guts on the thing is great too. But I'm just gonna progress. So looking at the camera, just looking at the overall specs now on the screen. If you're listening again, I just have all the just kind of top level specs of the camera. You said 48 megapixel is what you're excited about, Jared. I was also excited just to see that they had doing all this stuff with like portraits, and although we're probably not using that, just all that control that they're giving you on depth and focal range and things you can do as just a photographer without having to think about it, because the learning curve on a professional camera and learning your focus ring and all that, it's kind of crazy to do. But in this, you take the photo and then you can manipulate after the fact, which is kind of neat.
Yeah. And it gets back to just, all of the software that goes into, capturing a nice looking photo. It's more than just the hardware specs. It's all of the software around it to generate, how do you process the images? How do you detect the person, detect the pet, and blur the background and change the lighting and all these different things that go into that processing.
Yeah. On the last slide, I showed that they had the A16 Bionic chip, which is just a marketing fluff, but I believe it is the exact same chip that's in the 14 Pro. So they basically made to me, it feels like the 15 is the 14 Pro from last year. Pretty much. Small differences. Like I can take a 3x photo because I have 3 cameras, but that would not actually be for me a reason to buy a Pro phone, is that 3x. I find that 2x was fine. But yeah, you're right. There's a lot of competition going here. So just talking about this main camera, I think that's what we're all excited about. Now you can get in at an entry level point of the iPhone model and have a 48 megapixel camera. And so they say it's a quad pixel camera. Can you just explain what that is to people? I know we talked about that on the last time we did this episode, but it's been a year. Maybe people forgot.
Yeah. So with the quad pixel, so it's not truly 48 megapixels, 48 million pixels on that sensor. Like it is. There are 48 million sensing elements on there, but you're not getting the same quality of pixel as you would if you were to go and get some DSLR or some mirrorless camera that was also 48 megapixels. And it's what Jonathan's displaying on the screen here, is this sort of colored grid pattern. It's called a Bayer pattern. And it's the way that digital cameras sense light. So when a camera senses light, it can't see all of the colors at once. It can only really see specific individual wavelengths. And so the way that cameras have been designed is to look for red light, green light, and blue light. And so there are separate red, green, and blue sensing elements on that sensor to detect those different wavelengths of light. And then when we combine those different colors together, that's then how you can recover, oh no, that was pink, that was cyan, that was yellow. You can figure out what the actual color was by looking at the 3 different wavelengths. So in a normal camera that uses a standard Bayer pattern, what would happen is you'd have an alternating pattern of green, red, and blue. And the way they design that is within sort of a 2x2 square. 2 of those are going to be green, one's going to be red, and one's going to be blue. Just because green ends, as humans, we can see a greater number of green colors, more sensitive to green than we are to some other colors. And so that's
never knew that fact.
Yeah, so you put some extra green pixels in there to better discriminate that sort of green color. And so normally you would have this alternating pattern where alternating sensing elements are different colors. In a quad Bayer or a quad pixel setup, you have instead of consecutive pixels having different colors, you group a 2x2 set of pixels. And so it's going to be a 2x2 set that does green, a 2x2 set that's red, and a 2x2 set is blue. So it's as if you had taken a normal 12 megapixel camera, but then for each element just divided it into a little 2x2. So each green is now a 2x2 green, and each blue is now a 2x2 blue. So you have more sensing elements. There are physically more sensors on that or sensing elements on that sensor, but you're not able to see a different number of colors, or a different resolution or detail in those colors particularly.
Yeah. But what I find is interesting is they also, I'm assuming the sensor isn't bigger itself. Maybe it is, but it can't be. We're talking about inches here that we talk about with these larger format cameras. So to get more pixels, they have to subdivide them. But then, what does that do, right? If your sensor, one of these green little tiny photonic sensors gets really tiny, I mean, how much light can that take? How good can that actually be? Does that, I think they call it pixel pitch, right? As that gets tiny, it doesn't necessarily mean, that's why we always say more megapixels isn't necessarily better. So this is kind of like a way to make them smaller but still keep good quality. Is that kind of what's happening?
Yeah, yeah, and it's you bring up a good point there about the size. It's because like, as you make that sensor element smaller and smaller, it's able to see less and less light, and so the quality of its sensing is going to be lower. Because when I can see a lot of light, I can be very confident in knowing how much it was. But as that physical size gets smaller and smaller, there may be more noise. But by having more of these elements, you can do better statistics to figure out, well, what was noise and what was the real scene. Because come back to what you said, it's like a 12 megapixel sensor versus a 48 megapixel sensor. If they're the same physical size, they're still capturing the same amount of light, and so they would have. It's not like one's doing extra magic. It's still physics. It still just sees light. It's just by having this greater number of elements, they're able to do better statistics to figure out, well, where was the edge of that object in the scene? Where should I put that black color and then my blue color and my yellow? Because now I have more pixels, more elements on there to figure out where exactly did that thing occur. So you're able to do better post-processing by having greater information.
Okay. Well, and then talking about post-processing, one thing that I wouldn't say confused me, but they say you get this, 48 million pixels, 48 megapixel camera, but now the export or the photo that you get from it is 24. So you just said we had 48 million pixels. We're dividing it by 4 because we're taking 2 by 2, which you can see in this picture here. But that should leave us at 12, but we're magically getting 24. So that gets down to all that photonic engine and post-processing they must be doing to then upsample or, they don't tell us what they do.
No.
You can just see what it does, which is interesting because I think in the past they've always been 12 and 20 megapixels. Now we're getting this 24 megapixel range, which is encroaching on the exact camera I'm using now for this recording. I'm using a 24 megapixel APS-C sensor from Sony, and it doesn't use a bare, it's just bigger sensor. But now you're getting these 24 megapixel images from an iPhone that you typically would have to buy a larger camera for.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And that's when Apple said that you would get a 24 megapixel image by default, I kind of scratched my head. I was like, okay. I said, and it's similar things, because it's like, you would normally expect, the way this quad bear pattern is laid out, when you have these nice 2 by 2, squares of green and then blue and then red, the natural thing is just to take that 48 megapixel quad bear and output a really nice quality 12 megapixel. You just divide by 2 in both dimensions, so a reduction of 4 overall. But by them outputting 24 megapixels, they're going to have to do interpolation, upsampling, downsampling, some image processing. So, whether or not that's, just marketing and hype to say, oh yeah, we can go from 12 to 24. It could also be Apple just indicating that, well, they've got some better processing now. They've enhanced perhaps some of their computational photography, and so they feel good about the quality of that sort of 24 megapixel result, and so that's what they're going to optimize for and output. Even though that physically maybe there isn't a nice division of pixels on that sensor that gives you a nice natural 24 megapixels.
Nice.
It's highlighting Apple's what they call their photonic engine.
That is one thing. I mean, any camera nowadays, there's a little bit of a black box going on of what they do after you take a photo, because even any digital camera nowadays is doing some sort of post process. I even
Yep.
know these nicer cameras that I've been getting, these, if you get a full frame Sony, Fujifilm, in all these, they're doing something. And which I think is always silly too when you're comparing the image quality from, let's say, the flagship Apple phone to a flagship Samsung or Google Pixel phone, is that we're looking at choices of what's been done by a team of computer vision experts of what they want the image to look like. And we're not looking at like what was captured exactly on the sensor, which I think is always interesting. When I say, oh, well, that takes a warmer picture, photo. Well, that's a computer vision team.
Yeah.
That's that is not just a one for one for what it captured. Okay, so just keep us moving along. I have this picture of a depth map. So they did talk about how you're able to now take a photo and after the fact change the focal length and the the focal depth. So where your focus is. So I can focus on, let's say, a person or the person behind that person, or all of it by changing the depth of that focus. Yeah. And that they actually said the word depth map. So as a computer vision researcher, scientist, you probably got excited because wow, that's something that you've known about for a long time. Can you just kind of talk about what a depth map is and why that's important?
Yep. So a depth map describes the depths of the thing, how far away everything is in the image, and it does that on typically a per pixel basis. So for every pixel in your image, it's going to say how far away is that thing in the scene. So for instance, in this picture you're showing here on the left, we've got some, a tree branch, we've got some leaves, or there's a tree trunk behind it, and then things kind of, go off into the background. So those leaves are really close, and so they may be, half a meter away, a meter away, something like that. And so that depth map, could say, oh, this is really close. This is a meter. Those pixels are near, whereas those trees in the background, they're tens of meters away. And so that would have a much larger value in that depth map, saying it's much farther away. And so visualization here on the right is kind of showing this as a grayscale depth map, saying that, oh, bright pixels, white is near and black is far, to kind of indicate that depth. Just because we're talking about computer vision, Apple didn't say this, but behind the scenes, sometimes Apple, you can have depth maps which actually give you true depths, in meters, saying this is 1.7 meters, this is 2.8 meters. That's one way to represent depths. Another way that some APIs inside of Apple will do it is in terms of disparity. And so that's more of like a relative depth, or not even relative depth, but it'll say, assuming I had two different images of the same scene, how much did things move between those images? So parallax. Yep. And so like the things in the foreground, those leaves in the foreground, they would, as the camera moved side to side, or as I moved my head side to side, those leaves move a lot. There's a lot of parallax. And so the disparity would be high. It's going to say, oh, those leaves moved by 30 pixels of disparity. Whereas the trees in the background, they didn't move at all. They moved, 0 pixels or 1 pixel. And so you can also use a disparity map to convey depth information. Things that moved a lot have very short depth. Things that didn't move have a very far depth.
If you dive into just speaking on that point, if you type in depth map on the Apple documentation developer page, or just search for depth map Apple developer guide, they actually have a little bit of talking about that too, where they say there is that disparity, which I thought was interesting to say there's more than one way. And so there's a little bit of education you could do yourself, even on the Apple website, how they do that.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. So that makes sense. The closer something is, if you're moving with the camera, the more parallax movement you get. And so obviously it's much closer to the camera. So even if you had a single monocular view, one camera, you can kind of determine some depth off that.
Yeah. If that camera's from a single view,
right.
If you move, you can track, and see how much things are moving, and then use that to cover some depth.
It's interesting too, because I do know there's a lot of research that's gone on. I've looked at a few papers too now that can take a single camera and do its best to kind of guess some rough depth to the scene as well.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, I'm sure there's a lot going on that Apple does beyond that they might not even tell us again. But like detecting a person is probably more in the foreground, and if the second person is smaller, they probably know that person's further away. This is some depth. So I'm sure there's all kinds of things you can optimize
all
for.
sorts of tricks. Tricks you can do. So,
Yeah.
And it's
So
hard. It is hard. What Apple like? Let's come back to that. The portrait mode. There typically it's using the two cameras on the phone, so like the telephoto lens and your wide angle, or your wide angle and your ultra wide. But using two different lenses, two different cameras on the phone to try to help it figure out the depth. And that can be hard just because those cameras are so close together. They're only like a centimeter apart or a half an inch apart. And
so
so
that kind
don't
of
see a lot of disparity.
that gets to this next
Yep.
picture. You pointed out, Jared, when I showed you this ahead of the show, that this is probably actually from the LiDAR sensor that's on the Pro. But to me, it still applies to a non-LiDAR, that there's some confidence, right? So if you only have a centimeter apart from two camera lenses, you can only really perceive so much depth from a pair of images. I have a Luxonics Oak D sensor, and I think they're several inches apart, and it says like your confidence. They tell you what your range of confidence is as it gets further away. They give you this great table, and it said once you get beyond 20 feet, they're like, don't even use this camera. It's no good. And they even said 10 to 20 feet, there's still, you're not getting exact depths. And so this is what this is showing, right? There's some confidence there. It's like, well, I know that's off this pair of images, or pair of images, or the LiDAR sensor. I know something, but as it gets further away, you get less confident that's actually where it is.
Yep. And that confidence, and it depends too. You said depth. I mean, that's a big one. As things get farther away, the confidence in knowing, well, was that 20 meters or was that 20.5 meters? You can't say. It's really hard to say. It can also depend on, what you're looking at. If I'm just staring at a white wall, I'm like, I have no idea. I can't distinguish one pixel from another. It's all just white, and so that can give me a very low confidence estimate because I can't distinguish one pixel from another.
Right.
LiDAR solves some of that. So LiDAR does generate a depth map. So it's giving you depths in meters, so you know exactly how far away that thing is. But it can also be susceptible, or give low confidence results just based on the type of material. If I'm staring at glass or a mirror, it can easily get confused as it's sending out light into the scene, and then it reflects off of something, and then that can confuse it. So you might get low confidence for that. Or if you're looking at something really complex. So the example here on the screen has some, looks like some, window shades or blinds. You might see something similar to like if you looked at some leaves on a tree or a bush, where you have a lot of really, small, complex geometry. All of that LiDAR light, is going to be bouncing around in different ways, and it's going to be confusing to the sensor to know, well, where is the depth of every single thing in that scene? And so it may give a low confidence result.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Well, for time, I'm gonna move along. They did talk about. I'm gonna just this one note. They did talk about with the Pro, you can do at night you can get the portrait mode as well. At night only on the Pro, and it probably gets to exactly what you said, where if it's like a white wall, pair of images, you can't perceive parallax. In darkness, it's probably harder to perceive parallax. But if you have an actual LiDAR sensor sending out a visible light and computing how far it is, that you get away with a lot more. So there is something, if you're doing photogrammetry or 3D reconstruction with an iPhone, the Pro advantage is there, that it does fill in those kind of blank spaces.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's because, like you said there, because at nighttime, it's hard to see the detail. And so having that LiDAR sensor can help you figure out what the depth is and helps the camera focus at the specific depth of the thing that you're looking at. And so there is, that really nice interplay there between how they're using the LiDAR sensor to help the camera focus and do a better job of taking that picture.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, moving on to the 15 Pro. We probably won't actually go as deep into the cameras, just because to me it was kind of not a flop, but like okay, well, everything got a little better.
Yeah.
At least for the main camera. But again, I have up on the screen like kind of their top things that they cared about, or that they highlighted. Anything stand up for you, Jared, that you were excited about?
I think the biggest thing I was most excited about was just that extra that telephoto zoom. So stepping up from like what used to be a 2x or 3x, now to the 5x, optical zoom on that telephoto. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting also too when they made a big deal about the different focal lengths that the pro models can take, saying, "Oh, it's 7 lenses in one." You can have all the different focal lengths. I think again some of that's just marketing because it's still just the same physical lens in front of that camera. It's the same physical sensor. They're just using different computational photography or cropping of that lens. But again,
It's
just
like
Apple trying to,
presets,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah,
But they
presets for all.
probably, I assume they did something to know, like, hey, you pick 35 versus 28 versus 24. They probably in that photonic engine again. They probably then optimized for each of those to make sure you got the best, as opposed to just pinch zooming and it just cropping pixels.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
assume. Who knows?
yeah,
Yeah, I was excited as well about again USB-C because transferring files to my PC it takes a while. I think I transferred like 5 gigs yesterday from my phone trying to offload images and or videos, and it just takes a while on just an old lightning cable. Uh, I'm sad there wasn't a USB for the Thunderbolt, but I also know that a Thunderbolt cable is like $40. So I don't know even if they supported it like they do on their other devices, on their Pro, iPad Pro, and their the PCs. I don't know if actually people would go out and buy one unless they really needed it. So, and I guess we'll talk about the cameras here in a minute. And we'll talk about the new chip on as well, the A17 Pro. I was excited to see the action button because, to be honest, given my age, I'm one of those people who probably put their phone in silence when they got the first iPhone and then have not taken it out of silence since then. I have a watch that rings, so I don't even really need to hear it. I just feel it. I was excited to see there's a button there. I don't know exactly what I'll use it for, but I can't tell you how many times I'm fumbling to get a camera out to film my kids or something, and maybe just a quick launch. I know you can do it from the lock screen, but I always get to do like a specific swipe.
yeah.
Nothing's easier than an actual physical button. So I don't know. It's
Now,
small, but not enough to make me like saying, "Oh, you should upgrade for the button."
yeah,
But it's nice when I eventually have it.
yeah.
So moving on to the camera. So again, the 48 megapixel camera. I wish I could compare this to the 14 Pro. It's like the 15 and the 15 is the 14 Pro pretty much. I didn't see anything that I was like, wow. They do some marketing here. There's a bigger. We see this 2.44. Is that microns? Quad pixel. I just know that the pixel that must be a larger sensor overall because it's a larger quad pixel size. So
Yeah.
that just means better low light sensitivity, better probably detail capture. But I mean, it probably gets to be where you're, as I like to call pixel peaking, where you have to, or peeping, where you have to like zoom in way onto an image between that and the probably non-pro in a lot of cases to see a difference.
Yeah.
It's probably there, but and again, Jared, is it that like extreme detail really all that useful if you're trying to make a 3D model of the scene? I mean, I feel like a lot of times you're not trying to deal with 48 megapixel imagery to make a 3D model. You're usually downsampling it.
Correct.
Maybe
Yeah.
for textures, but
I was gonna say, like, yeah, the case where that high resolution, high detail has been most beneficial. I've seen it's like, yeah, is when I'm doing texturing, or if I'm trying to do a 3D reconstruction to generate like an orthomosaic, some other asset that I want to be able to zoom in on and see the really, really high detail and the pixel quality. In terms of the actual reconstruction process itself, redundancy very quickly outweighs resolution. So having a greater number of images from different perspectives, even if they're lower resolution, gives a more robust, reliable result than having fewer images at a higher resolution. And so
okay.
that's where a lot of times, when I'm, implementing or running 3D reconstruction algorithms or software, yeah, I'll downsample that image to, rather small resolutions. Just to mean the processing goes fast, and then I'm able to use a lot more imagery to get a nice reconstruction. Once I have solved for those camera poses, I can always go back. If I'm trying to texture that model, great, I'll pull in that high resolution imagery and I can use that to add the final textures. But yeah, for
Okay.
3D reconstruction,
So
it's sometimes it's not always that helpful.
okay. So once you figure out your camera poses, your camera's locations in 3D space, you can swap out images, right?
Yes.
So that's
Yeah.
something I've never really knew or played too much with. I use like Map and it'll downsample everything to quarter scale because it's really large imagery and speeds everything up, get really great matches. And I'm like, can I just swap out the images? That makes sense.
Yeah.
It does make sense because you're just trying to figure out where they are. You're not trying to figure out
Yeah.
what they're, the pixels. So,
Yeah.
all right. And then, and this is second generation sensor shift iOS. That's just your like actual stabilization of the like the sensor actually moves as you walk, which is great.
Yep.
As opposed to like cropping and warping like they do in the action mode, which I say never use if you want to use for 3D reconstruction. I can't tell a difference between this and my older iPhones. And so kind of like moving to the new camera, the 5x telephoto lens, they have their like 4D. I don't even think it's listed here, but they did this thing that like it moves in and out, up and down, left to right, like all axes, you could say.
Yeah.
And that's one reason why I've never used the telephoto lens for trying to capture, like, let's say, a rooftop from far away. I always just got really shaky imagery. So maybe this makes it better. I doubt it's still going to be perfect, but yeah.
It'll be interesting to see. I mean, it's impressive engineering to see what Apple, is describing. I forget what they had some, pentaprism or hexaprism, whatever. They had some, crazy sort of lens setup where it's like, okay, the light comes in and it reflects and internally before finally hitting the sensor, and then that sensor can move sort of in 3D, left to right, up, down, and then in and out. And so yeah, that's definitely going to help. They probably had to do that. Well, one, just because of the crazy, complex sort of lens design, but then like you said too, when you're zooming in on something, any subtle shake of that phone. It's amplified. That motion's amplified in the imagery because you've zoomed in, on that thing really far away. So having stabilization, is going to be really nice for that.
My question is, will it be better for just taking a photo, or will it really help you with video as well? Because there's a difference when you're moving versus trying to stand still, and you're just trying to minimize a little shake that you have in your hand. So I'm excited. Yeah, it's called a periscope camera, so they bounce light in crazy amount of directions to make it work without having this long lens hanging off the edge of your camera. So yeah, I'm excited about that. I think that's something, again, we can talk about, but until we actually have one, until Jared plays with one and does a bunch of photo analysis, it's marketing. So we'll have to see. I think this was probably one of the more exciting things for the Pro camera was spatial video. So again, on my screen, I show there's two cameras. So they're taking a 3D video. My first question for you, Jared, is I'm looking at this picture. It shows two side-by-side cameras with the phone sideways. I'm holding up my phone. I actually have the exact same camera configuration on my 14 Pro. Is it just something that you think they node lock to the 15 Pro, or maybe you need the A17 Pro chip to be able to do this? Or is there like something special about those cameras, you think?
I don't know.
This is speculation.
This
obviously.
is speculation. Yes. Because it's not even it's not even like 3D video. I mean, it's not 3D because when I say 3D, and again, it could just be terminology. When I think something's 3D, I'm like, there is actually full information there for the entire scene from different directions. That is 3D. But if I only have two views of something, that's stereo. It's like, as soon as I wanted to let me see this scene. What did it look like from the side view? It's like that breaks apart because my cameras didn't look from that direction. My cameras are only looking at it, the front of the scene from just slightly different, vantage points. And in this case, as I said before, these cameras are only like a centimeter apart, a half an inch apart. There's not a lot of disparity or parallax that's going to be visible there. You're not going to see, differences in depth. A lot. Now it will be there because these are the cameras that power portrait mode. And so you're able to figure out, well, what's, the depth of the scene? Is this thing close? Is this thing far? And so, what is Apple doing behind the scenes? Are they just recording two video streams and that's it? That's what they're calling spatial video. And so when you wear the Vision Pro, left eye gets left camera, right eye gets right camera. Are they doing some processing? Are they going to, and figure out the depth, in real time? So you get a video stream plus depth. And use that then to simulate, well, hey, if my user, maybe the user can move their head side to side, by a foot, and then they do some clever, in painting and image interpolation to try to, fill in the gaps, that weren't seen. But why is this limited to the 15 Pro? I don't know.
Well, then I don't have a video here, but there's a picture that they were showing the person sitting on a couch with the Vision Pro, and there's this kind of 3D flat screen floating in space, and it's the person they were panning the camera into this person's view. You can see like the cliff's parallax movement and what was behind them. And my guess is when I saw that at first, I was like, wow, they're gonna like that's what it's gonna be like. Then I realized after thinking about it, they're probably just doing that for marketing. It probably won't be that, right? Like you're not gonna have this scene where I recorded from one spot with my phone and then I can just walk around and look around the scene because most of that's made up data after that. You know,
Yeah.
even we're on nerfs where people say the same thing. Oh, well, I can nerf the scene and then move around. Well, it's like let's get far away from where the camera is. It's all guess and it's all
Yeah.
terrible. It's not gonna look real. So
Yeah.
we'll see. I just don't understand why I couldn't capture video on any of these dual camera, and then even perhaps, and they might have this. They might be able to take eventually with an iOS update, take video on these older cameras or something, and then process if it requires heavy duty processing. Maybe that'll happen on an Apple, silicon based computer or something like that. So,
Yeah.
it's just at this point hype. So I just want to just kind of wrap up this episode with the A17 Pro. So they always call them like the Bionic. Now it's actually a Pro sensor, which I thought was interesting. I think they said that the single threaded processing speed on this thing is now surpassing a lot of these higher end, PCs. So as a person who is not only a research scientist, Jared, yourself, but also an engineer who's building products and in pipelines that use an iPhone, is that something you're excited about thinking, and also how you approach processing things is like, wow, I got this really fast single thread. I want to make sure that you optimize for that. Is that kind of something you get excited about as it gets faster? I know it only says 10% faster, but they're getting fast. So
Yeah, yeah. No, I'll take any speed up that I can get. And yeah, I too I'm impressed by the single core performance, that single threaded performance of the iPhones. And that it is something that is very beneficial because when you're implementing algorithms, both for computer vision as well as just computer science in general, computer programming in general, certain algorithms are better suited to parallelism, and some algorithms are better suited to sequential executions, that single threaded thing. Because you can imagine a computation, if I'm doing something where, what I compute depends on the previous results. You end up with this sort of the sequence. It's like, oh, I compute result 1 and that feeds into result 2, and then that feeds into result 3 and feeds into result 4. It's like, I need to do all of those computations in order, one at a time. And so having really fast, single core, single thread performance can help me achieve that task as quickly as possible. Where there's other algorithms, you can do those computations, in parallel and run those on separate cores and separate threads, and that's great too. But yeah, I know that when I've implemented 3D reconstruction algorithms on the iPhone, some parts of that code is more single threaded and some parts is multi-threaded, and they each will speed up based on that.
So that's something to think about when they say something like a chip is 10% faster. That's not just everything. It could be depending if it's multi or single threaded. And so you get speed ups in certain areas or not. I think that as well for like a GPU, right? A GPU, all those CUDA cores in my NVIDIA GPU here. Well, that doesn't solve everything, having these thousands of CUDA cores, but it does do well when you're trying to do certain types of computation really fast.
Yep.
So, and then I didn't have on here on this picture, but there's also, they talk about the neural engine just gets faster and faster. So like they talked about even on the 15 that you take a photo and then you're able to, after the fact, do the portrait effects because it recognizes there's a human, a dog, or a cat. And so that is that neural engine. I'm assuming doing some machine learning, they've these machine learning specific tasks that are better on these like specific type of chipset that is able to do it really fast as you're taking photos and say, person, this actually should be a photo, a portrait mode, even though they had it in photo mode. So it's really cool what they're able to do with that. So
it is. And it gets back to just the, computational photography, and how much software goes into creating a nice photo. We didn't talk about it here, but thinking about, HDR and what the Apple calls smart HDR, where it's able to, take a bunch of different photos at different exposures and then figure out how to combine that. like, yeah, you can combine that using just standard algorithms, and just follow through a method. But you can also get better results as soon as you throw machine learning at that and using that neural engine to say, well, where are the people? Where are the animals? Where are the pets? I want those. I want the people's faces and my pet to look really nice. And then, what's the rest? What's the background? What's sky? What's forest? What's trees? And you can expose those different scene elements, differently based on, what type of object they are.
Yeah.
And so Apple's able to do machine learning, figure out what the different objects are in the scene, and then use that to help influence that final photo.
All right. Well, just to wrap up then take that point and wrap up this episode, I think we need to do an iOS 17 episode as well once that comes out. And I know it's been in beta for a while, so people can actually look at it now, but kind of dive into that, because you're right. There's a hardware component, but there's also a software component. And Apple every year also gives us all this great ARKit improvements and things. So we'll have an episode on that, I'm sure, soon once this comes out and we get to play with it and it's out of beta and we actually know what it can do. So thanks a lot, Jared, for jumping in and explaining some of his concepts. I'm really excited about the 15 Pro. And I do tell people if they're looking to upgrade, people are always looking for recommendations from me because I usually have all the new phones. I can tell you I've had 12, 13, 14 Pros phones, and it's the software updates are almost bigger than the hardware updates. So I say, wait till the software comes out if you're unsure. See if that gives you all the new things you want with the phone you have. If not, then you can upgrade. But these are all becoming, last 3-4 years of these are quite good cameras. So
yeah,
I wouldn't upgrade from the 14 Pro to the 15 Pro unless you actually had a reason or just like to, upgrade to the newest. So yeah, especially the 15 itself. I think that's the best entry level I've seen so far, where they added all these things to it.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
All right, Jared. Well, thank you, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I hope you liked this episode of Computer Vision Decoded. As I said, we'll probably do an episode on the iOS 17 software when it comes out of beta, as most of the upgrades you've seen in an iPhone are actually software driven. So we'll see that in the next episode. And always, make sure you subscribe to the audio or video podcast to make sure you get the latest episodes as they come out. See you in the next episode.